A common question I get is, how do you deploy a rover onto the surface of another world? In this video, I'll be doing exactly that in order to satisfy the contract, conduct temperature surveys of Minmus. Not only will we be looking at some effective ways of getting a simple rover where you need it to be, but I'll be also providing you with some setup tips to make the driving of said rover much easier. Let's get started. Looking at our contract here, it's conduct temperature surveys of Minmus, and if we go down and take a look at what's going on, it says measure a temperature scan on the surface at zone 4, KPGL alpha, and then if you notice there's an alpha, a beta, a gamma, and a delta, and all of these are on the surface. And we'll take a look at them in the tracking station in just a little bit, but they are all clustered fairly close together, so the plan is going to be to build a rover with obviously a thermometer aboard, and we're going to go through and visit all of them. Though if you take a look here at the fifth one, again temperature scan, but this time in flight below 4,200 meters near, and then we got ourselves another waypoint. So this one's fundamentally different than the other two. Let's go to the tracking station and take a look at what we got. So looking here at Minmus, this is the one where you need to be below that altitude of 4.2 kilometers. So the plan with this one is going to be to put ourselves into a polar orbit, much the same way as we did around the moon a few episodes ago. Scoop up that one, and then come around and land at any one of these. If you notice, there's 4 of them, all clustered close together. They're all on the surface. We'll do a rover, and we'll just drive from one to the other. But before we get into our build, let's take a quick look at where I am on the tech tree and our building tech level. It's the same thing as what you saw last episode: Tier 2 Launchpad, Tier 2 VAB, Tier 2 Mission Control, Tier 2 Astronaut Complex, Tier 2 Tracking Station, and as of last episode, a Tier 2 Research and Development. Taking a look at where we are in the tech tree, I have all of Tier 4 unlocked. I also have electrics, mostly for the solar panels and the extra batteries. Advanced flight control for the advanced inline stabilizer. We're also going to take some advantage of the RCS monopropellant and the RCS blocks that are available. Advanced construction for a fairing in which to enclose our payload. And up here we have propulsion systems for small fuel tanks and small engines. We're going to be taking advantage of those as well. But we're also going to unlock 2 new nodes, one of which is space exploration, and what I'm looking for in space exploration are the rover wheels, the RoveMax Model S2. These are the first rover wheels that you unlock, so in order to build a rover you are going to need to have wheels, so we're going to have to grab that one. And I'm also going to unlock my first Tier 6 node, Precision Engineering. This is available because if you follow the arrows, I can scoop by this one and get to this one. And what I'm after in here are really these small little construction parts, but it also comes with the Probodyne Hex probe core, so an improvement over the Octo that we've been using lately. And finally, the TD-060 coupler, which is a 0.625 meter decoupler. That's 160 science. I have plenty, so we're going to grab that. Let's get started with our rover. And we're going to be starting off in the space plane hangar because this is going to allow us to put it on the runway and do some nice test driving with it to make sure it works. So let's get ourselves started. We're going to start this off with our brand new Hex probe core. And we want to stand this up vertically. Now when you go to rotate that, make sure that the hex is still right side up so that you know your probe is actually right side up. You don't want to start with this thing upside down. Now later in the tech tree there is a probe body that's actually dedicated for rovers that makes building rovers a little easier, but I want to show you that you can do this with just a regular old probe core too. So we're going to go into structural because what I want to do is build some sort of frame to attach my wheels to. We're going to grab the cubic octagonal strut. We're going to go to just one-way symmetry. What I'm going to do is build a whole frame and then we'll just copy it onto the other side. I'm going to just put it iron like that. Then I'm going to put another one right there. And then we're going to copy that and we're going to go over here to the side, go to two-way symmetry. So we have one on each side like that. And then another two-way symmetry. Get another one in here, and then I'm going to use the move tool, take the snap off. We're just going to kind of clean this up a little bit so things look like one structural piece. And then we're going to go over to our wheels, grab the Rover Max Model S2, our only wheels that we have. We'll just stick these on like so. Now notice one of them is in the air. Clearly that's no good. If you take the move tool, and if you're rotating, make sure the snap is on because you do want to snap to the vertical. But right now this isn't going to work because if I rotate this one, the other one is going with it. So what I need to do is remove this one from the symmetry. We do that by right-clicking on here and finding the Remove from Symmetry button. And now, if I grab the Rotate tool, only that one rotates that way, like so. Come on, one more. There we go. And now it's straight vertical down. And then what I want to do is copy this whole assembly. So I'm just going to make sure, again, my snap is on. Grab this, stick it on there, and with 2x symmetry on, I now have one on the other side. So this is our basic structure for our rover. I think that's going to work pretty good. One thing you can do that actually helps to make the rover a little bit more stable, we have a ton of ground clearance. So if we grab this, take the snap off, we can rotate this just a little bit outwards. Do the same thing, gives it a little bit more of a wheelbase. Same with this one. Obviously we want these two to be roughly parallel. There we go. So there's our basic structure for our rover. Now let's think a little bit about electricity here. If we go over to our wheels, take a look at the electricity that they consume. It is 1 unit of electric charge per second, and that's for each wheel. So total here, that's 4 units of electric charge per second. And if we go over to our electrical and take a look at my only solar panel I have, the Oxtat photovoltaic panels, it's 0.3 units of electric charge per second. So to cover the 4 units is actually going to be pretty tough, but you don't really have to worry about it because it only consumes that when you are actively doing something with the wheel. So if you have the throttle on or the brakes on or steering, and most of the time the rover is just going to be in coast mode. So it's not as bad as you might think. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put on 6 of these guys. Alrighty, just like that. And for electrical generation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on 1 of these Z200 batteries just up here on the top. And then I'm going to put on 2 of these Z100 batteries. I'm going to put them both on the same side. And that's 400 units of electric charge. These guys, remember, consume 4 units of electric charge. So even ignoring the solar panels, this can run straight out for 100 seconds. You're not going to be pushing it for 100 seconds. I mean, once we're on Minmus, you'll see why. Now, you might be wondering, why am I putting them on just the one side? Well, because they weigh only 5 kilograms each, and I still got to put on my science, so I do need a thermometer, so I'm going to put that on the other side, and the thermometer here is also only 5 kilograms in mass, and we're also going to put on a barometer. The only other science I have is the Science Junior and the Mystery Goo, both of which really for transmitting, there's such a hefty penalty for transmitting, I'm not going to put those on because I have no plan on bringing this rover back with us. And we'll also put on a Communitron 16 antenna, just a single one for communication because we're definitely going to need it, and we're going to stick it here just for now. So why don't we give this a little bit of a test drive? So here we are sitting here on the surface. Let's put the brakes on so that it has a tendency to roll down the runway. I don't want to do that right now. Let's talk about a couple of things. So one of the things is if we take a look at our nav ball, notice that our nav ball is pointing straight up. And if I take the brakes off and push W, it makes it a little awkward to drive. Like, it's hard to see kind of where I'm going. That's easy to fix. Right click onto your probe core and look for where it says control point, and what you want to do is change the control point to forward, and notice that the nav ball is changed so that it actually is now pointing at 91 degrees. That's my heading. I'm pointing pretty much due east, and the blue is up, which is nice because the sky is up above us, the ground is down below us. If the brown is up, that just means that you have this upside down. So go back in the VAB and flip it around. And now if I take this off, it makes this much, much easier for me to drive around. And you can see I can drive around without too much issue. It is possible to roll it over, on Minmus especially, but you can be reasonably abusive. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you with this. if I push W to go forward, notice that I'm also kind of pitching forward a little bit. Do you see how it's kind of pitching down while I do that? And that's because as far as the control scheme goes, remember W is also pitching down. So W is not only driving the wheels, but also pitching down. And the same thing happens if you press the S key. It wants to pitch backwards as well as drive backwards, and both of those things, it's kind of annoying that it's trying to do two things at the same time. Now in Kerbin's Gravity, that's not so bad because Kerbin's Gravity is reasonably heavy, but when you're in Minmus's Gravity and you do this, it's going to want to kind of flip right over onto its head. So how do you prevent that? Well, you right click again on the probe body, and what I want you to do is go over here where it says reaction wheels. Notice now it's set to normal. If I turn this so it says SAS only, what that means is if I press forward, notice now it is not pitching. I'm pushing hard on the W key. You can see that with the pitch here, but it is not wanting to pitch forward, and this will be really handy when we're on Minmus. Alright, so test drive successful. Let's get back into the spaceplane hangar and continue with our build. Now, one of the things we're going to need to do is get this thing onto the surface of Minmus, and there are a number of different strategies for deploying a rover and being able to get it to drive around. And basically, I tend in my own games to employ one of two strategies. One of the strategies is to build, well, sort of a sky crane. It's not really a sky crane, but basically I like to build a booster up on top. I'm going to show you how to do that, but actually I'm going to end up going to my second way in just a little bit. But just in case you want to do it this way, you can do it this way. And this way is actually really useful for larger rovers. So you take an appropriate decoupler like the TD-06 here, and you make sure that it is upside down, because when it detaches you want it to get off of your rover. And then you can attach something like either structural parts or maybe a fuel can. Actually, I think I am going to put on a fuel can. I'm going to grab the Oscar B because it doesn't take too much. And then what you want to do is put on some rockets on this so you can just land with the rockets up here, and then once it's on the surface safely, you can detach this and fly this part away. The one thing though, when you put on the engines on the side, you have to make sure that the exhaust coming out of the engine nozzles doesn't push on any of the parts of your rover, so you're going to need to extend them outward. So I'm going to do that with some cubic struts again. Put 4 on like that, maybe another 4 out like that. If you're a little bit nervous about it, you can go another 4 like that, so you can make sure your motors are going to be out here in the clear. And then I'm going to grab, in this case I don't need much, just some ant engines. We're going to stick them here on the end, hold the Alt key so they sort of snap there, and then I'm going to get my rotate tool and simply rotate them downward. And what we have here is a little bit of a rocket motor, and if we take a look, you can see here, if I put this on vacuum, I have 1032 meters per second of delta V. Landing on Minmus, according to the delta V map, is 180 meters per second, but all of these powered landing numbers I find to be too tight. They're too idealized, and for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to add 50% to that to put it up to 270. Either way, you can see that 1032 is a lot. We have a thrust to weight ratio of 1.16. So in fact, this thing can do also a good part of the getting out to Minmus, or if you like, if you wanted to just do the landing, you can take out a lot of the liquid fuel and oxidizer, make your payload lighter, and deal with the landing like so. But the one thing about this option is that it is relatively heavy. You got a lot of weight of extra engines and fuel and things like that on board. It'll work perfectly fine, but I'm going to do something that I think is quite a bit simpler, and I think something that people sometimes overlook, is simply make your rover the lander. Simply put a little bit of fuel on the rover and a little bit of propulsion on the rover. That can be liquid fuel and oxidizer, or you can do what I'm going to do, which is to use monopropellant. Either way will work. Just land your rover. So basically it's a lander with wheels, and that's a nice simple solution as well. So here's what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to go to my only monoprop container, which is the Stratus 5 randified monopropellant tank. We're going to put this on the top. And the thing that's always sort of funny sometimes with these radial parts is they do not snap if you hold the Alt key. I have the snap on and I am holding the Alt key, and it won't snap to the middle, but remember that trick that I showed you is put it anywhere around the middle. Simply grab the move tool, make sure the snap is on, and simply do any kind of movement. Just simply touch one of these and it snaps to the middle. Now I'm going to take the snap off, and I'm actually, just for looky looks, I'm going to kind of reduce this down like so. There we go. So now we have ourselves some monopropellant aboard, and then I'm going to grab myself, under command and control, 4 of these place anywhere linear RCS ports. I'm going to go to 4-way symmetry, and again, if you're not getting 4-way symmetry, just press R to make sure it's not on mirror, and we're going to put 4 of these just like so. Now these are not going to be there to help us with attitude control or anything like that. They're there just simply to provide thrust. So right click on them, show the actuation toggle, take off the yaw, the pitch, the roll, the port starboard, and the dorsal ventral. We don't care about any of that. We only care about fore and aft, and we want to attach forward to the throttle so that we can use these just like normal engines. And unfortunately, the game gets very, very confused with this and doesn't know how much delta V this has or what your thrust to weight ratio is. If you want to, you can do the math yourself. I do have a video on how to use the rocket equation for exactly that purpose. And if you do that, you will find that this thing has a vacuum delta V of 357 meters per second, more than enough to land on Minmus, and a thrust to weight ratio of 1.43. So it's going to be fine. This thing could land on Minmus all by itself. In fact, although it doesn't have the delta V to do a full descent to the surface of the moon, it does have more than enough thrust. So if you put a stage below it, like I did with my moon lander last episode, this vehicle would serve well as a moon rover too. I finished off the rover by tilting the solar panels 45 degrees, as I don't know at what angle the sun will be when we are on the surface. As well, I fashioned it a couple of headlights and a couple of blinky lights to go at the back. I then took it into the VAB in order to finish off my build. So what we need to do first of all is build ourselves a little carrier that's going to carry it from low Kerbal orbit to Minmus's orbit. Don't forget that this thing can land by itself on Minmus with no trouble whatsoever, and according to the Delta V map, the injection burn from low Kerbal orbit to Minmus is 930 meters per second, and then 150 meters per second in order to get the capture about Minmus, so that adds up to 1080 meters per second. And to finish off the upper part of the LKO insertion, I want to add on, I want to add something less than 1000 meters per second. So that gets me to something no more than 2080 meters per second. And I accomplish that with a TD-06 decoupler. Underneath which, just to get a little bit of clearance, I grabbed an octagonal strut. And then 3 Oscar B fuel cans, below which went the Spark liquid fuel engine. And if we take a look over here, we can see that this gets me 1782 meters per second of vacuum delta V, right in the range that I was looking for, and a thrust to weight ratio of 1.47, which is going to do us adequately. Now what we need to do is get this thing into orbit. And I'm going to take that 1080 meters per second I budgeted for this transfer vehicle, add on the familiar 3800 meters per second to give you lots of delta V to get yourself into low Kerbal orbit, for a total mission delta V of 4880 meters per second. And I accomplished that with another TD-06 decoupler, then a 1.25 meter fairing, and we'll build the fairing right away. So building the fairing, we gotta make sure to get around these wheels here. So it's going to be a relatively large fairing. We'll go to 4 sides for the separation. Really jack up that ejection force and put it onto clamshell deploy because I like it that way. And this is the reason why I kept this under 1000, because it should be pretty clear that I'm going to need to deploy this fairing before I activate this engine. in order for this to be able to take off without crashing into the fairing itself. And in previous rockets, I've been taking the fairing out of the staging because I wasn't 100% sure exactly where I stage it. Now I know this fairing has to be staged before this motor, and that's why I kept the delta V of this rocket a little bit lower to make sure that actually I'll have more fuel in this lower stage, which means that this fairing will be deployed while this lower stage engine is still going. And speaking of that lifter, I wanted to put on some advanced inline stabilizers to help with our ascent, and then for the fuel cans, well, this is going to look familiar, an FL-T200, 3 FL-T400s, below which went the swivel liquid fuel engine, and then 4 basic tail fins for a little bit of extra stability. And to give me an appropriate launch thrust to weight ratio, I turned this down to 88% with a thrust limiter on that swivel, and that gives me a total vacuum delta V of 4,861 meters per second and a launch thrust to weight ratio of 1.35. And if you're looking at this delta V and thinking it's a little bit tight, don't forget that there is an additional 357 meters per second sitting in this little rover that's not being counted in this total. But after a little bit of retexturing, this rocket was ready to fly. In case it isn't obvious, the control point for the probe core is still in the default up position, and will remain that way until after we have completed our landing and are ready to do some driving. And speaking of the probe core, the Hex gives me the ability to finally lock to the prograde vector, which certainly is nice. I'm shooting for a parking orbit that will match Minmus's 6-degree inclination. I've gone to Minmus several times in this series, but if you need a refresher on how I like to do it, I've got this video here. If you are finding this wheel spin annoying, all you have to do is put on the brakes, which is something you are going to want to do anyway for our landing, so you might as well do it now. As mentioned earlier, the plan is to insert into a polar orbit of Minmus to facilitate getting over the required waypoints. Don't forget to transmit any science that may be available for the thermometer and barometer, but once you have your capture into a low polar orbit, it's time to start thinking about the actual contract. Alright, so our first goal is going to be this do it in flight below this 4.2 kilometers. We did this around the moon. Very much the same. The only difference is that Minmus rotates much quicker than the moon does, but making corrections as you come in on this are much, much cheaper because of Minmus's low gravity. So the first step is to time warp till we see that waypoint's going to be coming towards our orbit. Notice how much it moves with each orbit of my probe. Minmus is quite a bit quicker than the moon. Yeah, about here I think I'm going to do it. And where you are on the opposite side of the planet, point myself retrograde, and I need to get my periapsis well below this 4.2 kilometers. So we're just going to do a little bit of a burn. And then as I time warp, I'm going to watch that waypoint and pay attention. Particularly, do I need to make some sort of correction? Wow, this is working out really well. If you need to make a correction, you're going to be making a normal correction, either to the left or to the right here. But actually, I think I'm going to be pretty close just with the way this is working out just as it is. I got a little lucky. Oh, we are into the sector. There we go. Whoops, lost my pinned menu. How'd that happen? Grab a temperature scan, log a temperature scan, and we have collected a survey in that region, so that should be that one there checked off. The rest of these are down there on the surface. So after getting my periapsis back up to where it was before, it was time to take a look at how I'm positioned relative to those waypoints. They're very close to the pole here. I could go for this pretty much right now, but I think I'm going to do a little bit of time warping so that they end up a bit more on the day side. I'm going to go for this on my next orbit. Yeah, definitely. So about a quarter of an orbit ahead of my waypoints. I'm going to point this to retrograde. Bring this down a little bit. I performed a powered landing on the moon last episode, but you'll find that landing on Minmus is much easier. I'm going to burn a little bit to the east, just to bring this a little bit closer, I think I'm going to go for this waypoint here first. So activate that navigation, maybe a little bit eastward. Tiny little burns. Okay. And the thing that makes Minmus easier than the moon is the fact that you are falling so much more slowly, and it's much, much easier for you to slow down. Now, one of the things that's a bit annoying is I do have this one here activated, but the thing is when you're in the view here, you don't see it. Now, it is on the nav ball, but what you do have to do is you have to point to it to see whether you're heading at it. The fact that this only appears while you're pointing prograde and doesn't appear in this view here at all makes this actually quite a bit challenging to put yourself down with a powered landing right at a particular waypoint. There is a mod called Waypoint Manager that, if you find that kind of stuff frustrating, really, really helps. But I am going to do this mod free. I can see that I got to point a little bit eastward here. Back on retrograde. And I think I'm over the top looking at the terrain. No, I'm in this valley before here, so let's kill it. I can tell I'm not before this, so let's kill my speed right here and just drop straight down. Remember, we can drive. So I'm just pushing this retrograde vector right to the very top of the nav ball. Again, do not hesitate to quick save. And we're just coming on down. I only have 1 meter per second left in this stage, so I'm going to stage it right now. There we go. And in order to have these engines work, I do have to put on RCS. But now, just with the throttle keys, I should be able to have a little bit of throttle just like that. Beautiful. All right. Make sure your brakes are on as you come down so that you don't land and roll. And I may or may not be coming down close to a waypoint. It looks like I'm actually not, but we'll drive to it. This looks relatively flat here. I think this is going to be a good spot. Okay, about 200 meters to go. Upness there again, tons and tons of fuel. You can look here at my monopropellant. I've hardly used up any of it. Trying to see my lights. Okay, we are down. We'll leave the brakes on, RCS off, and now again, what we got to do is put this into rover mode. So for rover mode, we want to right-click on our probe core. We want to change the control point to forward, and we want to turn our reaction wheels over to SAS only. I would also recommend that while you're standing still, do yourself a quick save. It is really easy to lose control of the rover, but you can't quick save while you're moving on the surface. So quick saving while you're standing still is going to be a good idea. The other thing I want to do, I've not been on the surface of Minmus yet, so I can do a temperature scan and a pressure scan, and I'd like to transmit them. So while I am still in the sun, because it definitely looks like we're going to be going in the shade, I'm going to transmit the science from these two experiments and then wait for my batteries to fully recharge before heading off to our first waypoint. Notice that the waypoint does now appear on the nav ball, so it is pretty easy to head straight for it. And it's really easy to flip rovers on low gravity worlds like Minmus. So just be a little bit cautious and don't be afraid to revert back to your quick save in case that happens. Or if nothing is broken, there is easily enough torque in the reaction wheels to right this thing again. You'll just have to put the reaction wheels back into normal mode once more. Oh, we are in our zone, so we'll log our first temperature scan here. Recycle that, and with that one done, I will head. It automatically selects the next nearest one. You can see here it is towards the south. And as I make my way to the remaining waypoints, why don't I take this opportunity to go over the main takeaways from this episode. Building a booster on top, aka a sky crane, can be an effective way to deploy a rover, but don't neglect the more simple solution of just adding fuel and propulsion, essentially turning the rover itself into a lander. You can change the control point of any control part. For rovers, the control point should be set to forward. As well, turn the mode of any reaction wheels to SAS only, to eliminate unnecessary pitch, roll, and yaw control. Finally, quick save when your rover is stationary, and take your time and drive cautiously, especially on low-gravity worlds like Minmus. And after taking my final temperature scan and completing the contract, I decided to drive the rover to the top of this hill so that it won't be stuck in the perpetual darkness of this polar valley. Note that, despite doing almost this entire mission in the dark, the rover still has over 3/4 of its remaining electric charge. And as I bring this rover to its parking spot, I will be drawing this episode to a close. I want to thank you for watching and hope to see you again for the next one.